Advanced philosophy memes. We make good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Advanced philosophy memes. We make good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Shoutouts to Andreas, Deacon, my boy Scott, Pedro, and everyone else that engages on my posts, etc. Keep it up, man. You'll get there someday. And everyone else for playing memes.
Well, so far today, I've gone mini golfing, set up a new APM stream with Kurt, had my channel deleted with 7 strikes added last night after the video with Call, and then talked to YouTube, got the strikes removed all in a period of minutes to hours, but it was very stressful. But it was like a kind of like a, green wire bomb kind of thing. Like it's always, but it's weird. Civility is like disarming a bomb, trying to be civil. It's just this, it's really hard to deal with. Anyway, then I was making a plan last night to talk with Kurt, who's been patiently waiting literally since then. And then I was like, I don't even know if it's possible. My channel's been deleted. I think it might be literally over and I have to go to Odyssey. So I'm glad that I got that all figured out, because now Kurt's here. And Kurt is, I was going to say really quickly before I let him say anything, because I'm just a monstrous maniac, that he is one of the greatest men I've ever met. He's a fantastic musician. He made that song that you just heard just now, and he makes a lot of other songs. And we've been making some other music together even. But the stuff he's doing on his own time is just incredible. Plus, he's been a part of the Advanced Philosophy Memes group since as long as I can remember. And he's a major participant and a mod. I believe you're a mod now, right? Have you accepted the mod invite thing? I think you're a mod.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So he's also going to save us that way. And George, thank you, George. I love you so much. And, it was he says, all hail Andreas, long live the fighters. Ain't that the truth? The thing is, you can't just die for what you believe in. You have to fight for it as long as possible. It's a weird conundrum there. But yeah, things are okay. I did get Sync Tank demonetized, but you know what? So many other things going on. I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. So I appreciate, George, that you sent the super chat so early on. That's really awesome. Oh, okay, Kurt, I love you. How are you doing?
I am existing, and it's something, I can tell you that.
Yeah, so where are you again?
Right now, I am in Pennsylvania, near State College, where Penn State is. Go Sandusky. And no, it's amazing how much that topic it like apparently gets still brought up at like Penn State board meetings like all the time.
When you said ghost, and you could have meant like get out of here. You never know. Like it's okay. So
it's just a huge black market.
No one's gonna stop talking about pinecone enema or whatever the heck was Penn State. That's the first time I even really heard of Penn State. Because I'll be honest, Penn State wasn't like high on my list of places I was like trying to go, like in college, But
yeah,
really, if you think about it, bigger than football, it's fetish juvenile taboos. That's what people really are interested in, more than football. They're like, wow, Penn State, you can get this whole pinecone thing to happen.
I never heard about the pine cone thing. But I'm willing to go down rabbit holes for sure.
Oh my god. Well,
Yeah,
but you make music too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good. I'm in Pennsylvania. What you said was true. Um, Technically, I do put a lot of stuff under the artist name of American Time Machine. I do not recommend the music whatsoever. So
I
if you
do.
want to find
American Time Machine on SoundCloud is epic. In fact, we'll pull up a link
it,
while you're talking about it. Keep going.
well, I think it's under my name on SoundCloud, which I don't really. I just like send that to my friends. But as far as like the broader stuff, to where I don't care who either doesn't discover it or discover it, it is American Time Machine. And now, well, like I've been a little bit resistant to talk about a lot of these things because like the music now it's becoming a lot more experimental in nature. And it's been hard to like I don't know, life's weird. It's like now everything on social media, everybody knows everything about you. And so it's hard to like have a work grind. Like I'm also a working person and like it's totally unrelated. And I feel reservations about talking about that sort of thing. But now I'm trying to pivot. I'm not getting a lot of, I feel like I'm maxed out my value of my job. So I might try to go somewhere else. So now I'm a little bit more open to talk about those things in my position where I'm at right now.
Right. And so like before though, I mean, work, imagine in work, you're trying to, on one hand, appease these people that want you to not be crazy. They want you to be, and this is, we've shown this in urban environments. People start to wear muted colors. They start to worry more about the smells that humans produce and all these things. Like they want you to be as subtle and numb to each other as possible. Whereas then you're spending your life trying not to feel so vapid, improving your self-worth, right? And so there's this conflict going on because you're allowed to work on yourself so long as you've paid society, which is this dilemma, right?
Yeah, you're describing it perfectly. I feel like, and that's exactly, and I don't mean
For
to
the
like shift
grift,
around.
Planet X. No, sorry, I had to give him a thank you.
Yeah, a lot of that is like I've worked in like several like corporations and like it's and I don't mean to turn people off conversationally, but like I think I used to be really naive to like what corporations kind of represent and like it's I'm not even approaching it from a political level, but like as far as like what just seems like it just is there to personally drain your soul and make you feel like you're not like doing something that you should be doing. I feel like I worked at Domino's, I worked at McDonald's, and there's something so impersonable, if that's the word, about the process. It really turned me off. I don't think I'll ever work for a corporation ever again, personally, because like, and I don't even necessarily think it's that corporations have to be bad, but what we've let them turn into, we've let them turn into burnout machines that are cold and uncaring to individual needs. And that's, I mean, when your end goal is profit, it does create problems. Although, like, I don't think it has to create problems, but it does create problems. So I don't work for any corporations anymore, and that's been better. I've been able to last longer, but still, I feel like those societal norms they still creep in, and I feel like they're creeping in more, and we have to do something about them, and nobody's really sure what to do about them.
I mean, can't you just become a corporation? I mean, aren't we kind of already with our social security numbers anyway? We've got this credit card. This is a character we're signing over to. I mean, doesn't a corporation have more rights than a person? Or I mean, it's a person, I guess, but isn't a corporation able to get away with more, have less responsibility or over observation? Corporations, I mean, being sociopathic, I feel like I'm just seeing this from the other side after having my channel put in jeopardy. Like I wish I had some like cold-blooded lawyers who were spending time watching out for decisions and stuff, because otherwise, we're relying on our feelings, and isn't that dangerous too? I mean, the corporations at least are cold-blooded killers.
Yeah, they really are, and like I think if we're going to go through the esoteric like interpretation of things and really compress it down to consolidation of power, corporations might just represent a mass consolidation of power. And I think if you look at that kind of process historically, I don't think it's forever is sustainable in the way that we're doing it. And when that becomes too oppressive, it at some point it makes this, it pretty much upends the entire system. So what that upending might look like, it's hard to imagine what it will look like. I think we've already seen like iterations of that. There were just explosions in policy, obviously, like with stuff like the New Deal that really changed the landscape forever. And there were, I don't know, it's hard to say like that it's a yo-yo, because it's not something that's swinging back and forth. It's something that's constantly readjusting itself. Like when the New Deal happened, I feel like that was a really extremely balancing force, and it definitely put things, I feel like it did set the stage for the economy to grow a lot better, even though there were some long-term things that it didn't address.
What do you think about the New Deal? So when you think about the New Deal, because it's an interesting point in history, right? And my understanding is they crashed the economy, the elite by the infra elite by the intra elite, the sub elite, and the ones that they take over everything. And then there's a consolidation of power, and then there's a series of state organized new work deals, which can be paid, through the state taking money from all the citizens to pay for the municipal works. Is that one side of it, or what's your perspective of what the New Deal was? What happened?
Oh, my perspective is like, I don't know shit, to be honest. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't know shit. But like and trying to make sense of everything and like what's been happening, like why we had such a huge economic explosion in the 50s and 60s and what led to the boom, I think there was a lot more equality. There was a lot more incentive to work. There was a lot more. Yeah, there was incentive. Yeah, there was a lot more coming back to the citizen. And
this is China in 2008. This is what they did when they jump started their economy. Is the same thing. They built in the United States. They built a system that allowed for so many people to get jobs. It didn't matter if it made sense, just to make sure that the jobs were there because it was safer. I mean, we literally also, I guess you could say, this is the lighthouses for the ships too, because they built the infrastructure in the 40s and 50s and made it possible for there to be trucking industries and everything else.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, it's like, yeah, sometimes you can pull some levers from a government perspective and achieve success. So like, I used to be like, I still am very like, a lot of my philosophy, I guess, is like libertarian or like anarchist in many ways, but like I feel like eventually once you get down to the nitty-gritty of changing things, a lot of your terminology just fades away. So yeah, I like a lot of those things and a lot of those ideas. How do we get to like our picture of what perfection is, I guess? And from where we were with the 50s and 60s, all of a sudden the 70s and 80s come about, and the FBI agent Desiree Plum on Advanced Philosophy Memes, no, she actually recommended the book Evil Geniuses, and I read that. Really good read. And it went through all of the policies that went on through the 80s into the 90s. Yeah, and it separated. It basically went through why the workers were getting fucked ever since the 1980s. There were just so many more rights that the corporations essentially had ever since Reagan came in. And there's really no other way to put it, is that just the worker, ever since the year Reagan got elected, got really more and more fucked. And that continued into the 90s. That continued into 2000s. And in order to summarize that, I can't even tell you like all the special breaks that they got, but in terms of like the whole antitrust laws, like there were far fewer antitrust laws. I discovered that the last Republican that was at least somewhat anti-corporation was probably Gerald Ford. And when I look at Gerald Ford's track record, like, wow, this guy seems like a reasonable president. And I think the fact that he was actually such a good president was probably due to the fact that we didn't even elect him. He was coming off of Nixon, who it's
Ford
think
and
that's
Biden have so much in common. It's true. I was just thinking about that the other day. And also Ford falling down the stairs, just like Biden falls down the stairs. That was my first connection to them.
I
But,
mean, yeah, maybe he was delusional. I don't know. It's like everything I read on paper seemed pretty good.
no, he was selected by the Republican Party in a lot of ways, trying to, you have to think about also Carter, though, right? And so there was a play on the other side to privatize as well through liberalism, saying, hey, we need to get rid of the government owning these things in general. And that was really played out well for the CIA because or for a lot of agencies, because then they could privatize their agents and their different special operatives. I mean, so the funny thing about the word agent, people don't realize this, it usually means like a foreign contracted operations manager. You usually don't call a CIA personnel an agent, right? Because an agent you can have agency, which is the capacity to do things. You have a license to kill. You could have agency to perform your duties. But it's really, an agent tends to be one of the private or foreign sector, private or alien sector. But I wanted to pull this up because you had talked about examples and not having, because there's so many, isn't it true? There's so many examples. But Reagan comes up a lot because of emptying the mental institutions and causing the homeless crisis. And, love conservatives, love liberals, love them all, love the skull and bones. But what I experienced growing up in California was in Santa Cruz, a lot of crazy people living on the streets that were talking to themselves at the same time that headsets were coming out. And you could never tell if somebody was talking to themselves or talking to their friend on their, new Google headset, or talking to the CIA, or some combination of all three, or the two. So it's one of those things where it also allowed for companies to privatize the uniforms, meals, locations, and Reagan made a fortune. It's incontestable. He made a fortune off of insane asylums privatization. I mean, there might be some reason that it's awesome because they used to throw people that just couldn't speak English into insane asylums, but it's a thing that Reagan made money off of regardless, right? So
yeah, and presidents and Congress people having incentive to just essentially not play fair, that probably is something that should be addressed at some point. And it's the more I feel like I understand the problem, the more I understand how complex it is and how little I personally know how to solve it, because I think a lot of people feel that way. And I'm not trying to give myself credit. It's just like, wow, life is just overwhelming to a lot of people and a lot of groups of people sometimes. One thing, and going off of what you said about Reagan and the homelessness and shit, I think, I really think that right now people are really underestimating the fallout of our economic system. I'm not saying everything is going to go under. I'm saying we're stuck in the cycle of every decade or even less than a decade of shit hitting the fan, and we just start accepting the new norm and accepting that people get marginalized and people get thrown off of the system, like in 2008. In 2008, nobody wanted to measure how many people fucking died because of what happened. A lot of people did fucking die because of what happened. A lot of people were made homeless because of what happened. And it was, there were parallels to what happened then and what's happening now. I'm not saying it's going to be as bad. It might be as bad. I don't know. Nobody knows, because there's just so many forces that are intertwining. There's a lot of indicators in the economic realm right now. People are running out of their savings. People are spending in terms. If people are spending, it's not good. If they're spending on credit, it's a terrible formula. If they're spending on credit and they don't have any.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just imagine Soviet Union, but also Yugoslavia. We're returning to the point where everything you own is in permission for you to have, and instantly can be taken away again if you're not going along with the flow. You've got a kind of an allowance that you might have thought you worked for, but it's not your property, and they can just take it from you. They can lock your bank accounts like Alex Jones, and they can, do whatever, right? So it's not yours.
Yes, if nobody owns anything, do we really live in a capitalist system? And I think that like we don't.
I absolutely don't think we live in a capitalist. This is a big thing. It's one of the reasons, something I argue with communists the most about, is that their understanding of Marxism is flawed because it's not based on true capitalism. True capitalism, like the Native Americans pulling a buffalo out of the herd, making jackets out of it while the herd continues on capitalizing, is very different than this neo, and I don't like even the word neo, this feudalistic system we live in. We live in a feudal system where there's an oligarchy. It could be the democratic majority mob rule dictatorship. It could be the despotic elite family. It really doesn't matter. But there's a despotic system here that owns everything, has a monopoly on ownership. And so anyone else is being given as little as possible to live in the system. And that is feudalism. We are living in a serfdom. And George has become a member. St. George, the Dragon Slayer. God, I love you, George. You're great. But Kurt, what do you think? Do you think we live in a serfdom, or is that a little exaggerated?
I think that's a pretty reasonable example. Like, I'm a big fan of George Carlin and a lot of his, late life stand up. And like, when I really, really try to evaluate what happens on the broad scale, I take a lot of my own experiences as a worker. I feel like being a lower middle class, white dude, like in the system, has shown me like exactly what's expected of the working class, because I've had to work. I've been like, I went to college, but I mean, I didn't come away debt free. I didn't pay off any debt yet. So I feel like that drive of having that debt over my head, it really has exposed me to what everyone else is experiencing.
Right.
And that being said, like, in going through my jobs, I've settled on one, like, kernel of wisdom when it comes to bosses and owners. I don't think in my experience, there's never been a such thing as a good owner of a business, just people that are less shitty than other people. And it's not necessarily because they're always bad people. And Let me get into this. I'm going to go a little bit farther and say, I'll try to be a little bit vague, but like, I've seen the process of what people go through when they actually have their own business. Like, a lot of people really do put in the work. They put in a lot of time. They, do open and closes at their own place. And if they actually are onto something and they get to be successful, they end up reaping the benefits from it. But I feel like their psychology ends up being so warped in the process. And what happens, I'm not trying to justify it. Sometimes workers really are shitheads. That's one thing I've also learned. Workers can be shitheads, like in any workplace, and really fuck over their boss in a lot of ways. So it does. There are two sides of it. But I'm saying, in that process, if the owner is saying, "Wow, I did all this work. I'm so successful," and they start taking that money and they start spending it in extremely frivolous ways. And that becomes a habit, and then they get accustomed to this process of the business feeding their habits and expecting that business to grow on its own in order to further indulge their habits. I don't want to give very specific examples, but and one of my former bosses,
wait, really quickly before you tell the story. So apparently George, the giant slayer, although I think he slays dragons as well, has gone as far as to give some memberships out. So if you're in the chat right now and you're not a member, if you can take those, you can become a member for a period of, I think it's like he paid for a month for you guys. So go ahead and click on that and you can become a member. Wow. And there's some unlocked features for you. Thank you so much, George. That's awesome. But yeah, sorry. Kurt, tell us about your...
There was one time in which he set it up so that we would prepare for him like $50 to $100 worth of product within the store. And then he came up with this thing, say, I want to do something really special for the staff. And like, he took time out of his day to call us and say, hey, we want you to do this special thing. And, the last 2 years have really been interesting for everybody. I don't think anybody disagrees there. The special thing was getting our entire staff, $20 worth of small Frosties from Wendy's. That was the special thing. It's like, what is our measurement of doing a special thing for your coworkers if that's the bottom line? This is this is one of the, and this isn't something that happens every day. It was like, oh, we get something different. This is something that would happen maybe, you know, like every other month. And I feel like there was such a disconnect there.
Right.
I feel like
corporate social responsibility doesn't exist properly. It's just forced, right?
Yeah, it is a little bit forced, and I really do feel like there's a system of entitlement built in to say, it's almost like ritualistic. Like, oh
Right.
yeah, I transformed my time and effort into this thing. Therefore, all of all of my expectations at the other end of this become justified because society has told me that they are now justified. And there's never been like the thought process of deconstructing that whole element. Why do you need, if you're not in debt, why do you need to even construct that system? Like, why you have such pain in your life to where you feel like you have to get somewhere else or get something else?
Right.
And
most people are trying to get somewhere else until they get to the point where they're stuck forever. And it's weird. You know, you've seen Americans that are stuck forever, but you know, I just had this Nigerian guy on the show, and you can tell like he's really trying to move forward in his life. But you have to warn him, like, because otherwise he might end up here. And this isn't necessarily the greatest place to end up either, right?
Right. And like, and I've only been, have you traveled much? Like,
oh yeah,
legit.
I've been a lot of places. Yeah.
Well, I know you've been to Machu Picchu, is that right?
I've been all over South America. I lived in South America for a year or over a year. And then I also lived in Europe for a while. And I've walked across Spain to the Camino Compostela. I've been all over, you know, I've been a lot over Europe and back and forth. And my family's from Croatia. So I haven't done Africa yet, although I have a lot of friends from Africa. So I'm kind of like gearing up towards it. I was going to go right around COVID when I was in Spain, and then, you know, stopped. The world stopped.
Yeah. Very cool. And I referenced that, and I wanted to make it like a point of connection. I've been out of the country one time. But right out of the gate, there's some. I went to Jamaica.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, that's still cool. Yeah. Was it Club Med, or did you get to actually hang out with Jamaicans?
No, I went to there's a town called Morant Bay, and I don't know. I kind of just like picked a place close to Kingston, or like relatively close to Kingston. I was like, I'm gonna get the real deal. I was like, maybe someone will murder me, but I'm too depressed to care.
Right? Yeah. That's the best way to go to a country, you know?
that was legitimately it. So I went there, and like I was literally the only white guy in the village, and which was kind of awkward. And like there was a little bit of like racism, and I don't think it was like what we traditionally think of as like, you know, racism, like, oh, it's just your skin color. Well, it's like, if I can even afford to go on vacation, or like go somewhere and get a new experience, I already have like so much more wealth than like what's concentrated in there.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, really, your skin color isn't representative of just your skin color in itself. It's representative of everything else. It's like, oh, you're white, therefore you're successful. And they weren't wrong. I mean, like, compare it, like,
right, yeah, you have to be humbled all day. You see people's lives, and you're like, I'm not that successful, you know, and they're like, yeah, at least you got to eat today, and your power didn't get shut off, and you're not worried about being killed by two separate groups of terrorists that could be fighting each other. Yeah. You're like, okay, fair enough, you know.
Yeah, so like,
on that level,
I feel like you got to see above it. You're like, yeah, I kind of get it, you know, and plus it's literally a plantation island, to where like at one point there was a ton of white people. Slavery got abolished, and the white people were like, "Oh, see ya, this isn't our problem anymore." And now it's all black people that were left over.
Slavery got abolished. I mean, they still have they still have white presidents often in Jamaica. I think they finally have had a black president in the 90s or something. They finally did, but it's always been, you know, even you think of Peter McIntosh, because he's got a Scottish dad. There's so many. The Jamaican accent, the connection to Scotch and Welsh accents is really, you can hear it even. But the thing I wanted to quickly interject was that when I was young and I would think America was a safe place because TV told me to, so I didn't really question that later. And so I would be like, man, I got to go to this other country so that I can go to New York, because New York is the most dangerous place in America. So I got to go. I can't get there yet. So I got to go to these other places. And I would go all around the world. And then I'd be like in this bus stop and think, oh man, this is it. This is where I'm going to get killed or robbed or something. It's going to be so dangerous. And I'd be looking around. And then I'd realize everyone, doesn't matter what country, everyone was more afraid of me than I was of them. They're like, that's an American. He might have a gun. You know, Americans are creepy, you know? And we always think that. And then I remember being, you know, anytime I've been robbed, you know, granted, I had my passport stolen once at the border in Bolivia or with Ecuador and Peru. But for the most part of my life, the only times I've been robbed I can think of and hurt even Los Angeles, got my wrist broken by, you know, a gang. And then,
Shit.
yeah. And then, and my Back to the Future hat was stolen in a bar in Copenhagen. So it was rich kids, you know, both times you know what I mean? And so it's interesting because any other place I've been in the world where people were super poor, I mean, maybe I'm lucky because I often experience the best of people, not always, but often do. You know, most of the time I felt safer and protected almost everywhere else I've been besides the United States, you know?
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic. I feel like there might be an aspect to where like any sort of relative wealth is kind of like intimidating to a certain degree. It's like,
that's true too. They're like, oh, if somebody knows him, they could find us, put it on the newspapers.
Well, like, yeah. Well, I mean, like, metaphorically, like, you know that if you cross paths with a lion, you know a lion is a super powerful fucking animal, and you don't want to piss it off. The lion represents a certain set of power, and like wealth has a subtle effect of like representing a certain concentration of power. You don't know how that power manifests, but there might be something, you know, like subconsciously going on there. But that's a terrible take, and I don't recommend it be taken as a good one.
I've noticed basically everywhere I go, there'll be people that now, because, you know, at this point, I know somebody in every country because of the YouTube. So I remember in Bermuda, I pulled out my phone landing on the airport. It was super random. Just went to Bermuda because it was like cheap to fly there from New York after New Year's. And I pull out live stream. Hey, I'm in Bermuda at the airport. And then one of the people I haven't even talked to yet who's following says, hey, I'm in Bermuda. And he comes and picks me up from the airport. So, I mean, the other thing is knowing people and connecting with people. It's so much more powerful than money, and money is so scary, right? Because you can I remember this from couch surfing. I could spend $100 a night to stay in Paris or Berlin, but I could stay for free couch surfing. And if I was alone in a room I paid $100 for, I'd get less out of it than if I went and stayed for free with some group of kids, right? And met them directly. So it's always about actually interacting with people as much as possible.
Yeah, for real. And I can't say that as much as you can, but like literally where I was going with all that is like the experience did like change my life to a certain degree, and it really humbled me to know like just what people go through. They all go through their own thing, but also to know how distorted the world stage is, specifically because the U.S. even exists.
Right.
And what, yeah. Like, well, not only is there this huge concentration of wealth that has residual effects that people aren't even aware of. You have to like sit down and like explain it to understand what's going on. And the example is there are so many like work programs for like second and third world countries to literally come to the wealthier countries in order to get work that's better than the work that they have. It's still not high pay, you know, comparatively. But what ends up happening is people often decide, hey, do I want my version of poverty or the apparent poverty that I have because the world's telling me that I'm poor? Do I want that, or do I want to get away from my family and go get, you know, that, you know, artificial sense of wealth and send it back to them so that they can have this sense of a standard that's been presented before me? Right. I think it's hard to describe, but like I think that's going on all over the world. And
oh yeah, China right now for sure. I mean, so do you ever watch communist Chinese television?
I never have. I imagine I would get a kick out of it, you know.
Here's the setup for why, because like I did, and it wasn't on purpose. It was just that I was going to Europe like first to see my family. Oh whoa, check this out. This is the guy who was with me in Copenhagen when my hat got stolen. That's pretty meta. And also Stellium asked if I was in Spain. How many tickets did we get? Did I get did you get in when I was driving your car across Spain, Stellium, and that one night from Toledo? My bad. Anybody who wants to support Stellium and all of his research, very well. But sorry, I was jumping into a thing and then that happened. Oh, China. So I went to Europe and my parents shut off satellite TV. This was years ago, and I was like kind of 13 or something like that, 12. And but we didn't have cable because we live in the mountains. We had like a satellite TV, and we kept some channels that still would come through when you didn't pay for it. And they were like Polish satellite television, New Zealand rugby international, and communist Chinese television. And communist Chinese television was the only channel in English besides the rugby station, which is a little off. But they would tell us all about corporate social responsibility in China, and they showed this guy who had an obsession with horses and poodles. He's like, this is back before billionaires gave China a bad name. Like, we have our own billionaires. Look, we have money. Here's our billionaires, and they do the same things as your billionaires. They collect dogs, little dogs, weak dogs, you know. But then he's like, what I did was I came up with this. I was working in a sweatshop building motorcycles, and I came up with this idea to take a combination between this motorcycle and that motorcycle and build it myself in the gray market hours at night. And then I decided I'm going to start selling that, and it built his own motorcycle company. I don't remember the name of it, but it's some off brand you mostly see in like Paraguay or China. But he had 3 teams working for him: blue team, red team, and green team. And the grays were the new people, and they got to get their way into blue, green, and red. And those are the different shifts, but also they would compete with each other in sport games for who gets to have what opportunities or what vacation points or whatever. So there was this competition thing. And they also did this thing where they grew part of their time organic vegetables. So everyone working there got organic vegetables and food so that they were, that was all taken care of. This all goes back to Owenism. Robert Owens was like the first Marxist, but before Marx. And he was more of a corporatist. He was saying, hey, if we put food in horse troughs, it'll be more efficient, right? So if we educate our slaves, then we'll have sustainable slaves. But suffice to say, he built this system, and then they competed with each other. Google saw it, and then that was immediately Google started running with it. And that's why they built their entire managerial theory based around contemporary corporate social responsibility practices in Marxist China. So, I mean, they do this all around the world, right? And they set it up in such a way that you can be really eager to have the privileges that they give you and compete directly with other people for your privileges.
Yeah, it's the world stage of gladiator games, but like with your life, and you don't even know that it's happening. A lot of people
corporate gladiator games.
That's exactly what it is. Like and some people, like, you can't tell people things that they don't want to hear and they don't believe you, but like that's just generally how I partially come to see it. And that being said, like I've wrestled with myself, like, what would make that system better? What would, like, how can we have companies and say that they're creating, like, real value? What is real value? Everybody would define it differently, but like, I don't know. I think it can be a mechanism to maybe accelerate some form of art, but like it's weird because you have that constant grind between art and standardization.
And gladiator corporations. Do you know about the company Oracle? Oracle's corporate practices, right? Oracle fires the bottom 10% every year and have done it since the 80s. So they're all competing with each other all year round, and they know objectively that whomever performs at the least by 10%, the 90% best make it. But anybody, this is what they've done, and it's just so arbitrary. Because what if it's a really good year for everybody? Doesn't matter. Then they're gonna take you out anyway because they're grading on a curve.
I mean, in one sense, like, if there's a safety net for those bottom 10 people, like, they're not going to lose their families or whatever, like, that could be seen as humorous. But like, if it's literally just like, oh, like the actual chopping block, then yeah, it seems like something that's really fucked up, and there's so much bias out there that it's hard to come at a conclusion like that. But
Right.
what I'm saying is like if you invested in something, say you bought a share of Tesla, would that be ethical just to try to invest in that and get a return on it by simply just giving your money? I've kind of wrestled with this idea, and
As opposed to participating and trying to change Tesla, just kind of riding along on the train to get money.
yeah, that, or even saying like, what's the point in even having cars? What's the point in accelerating technology? Like, are we trying to expand the population? What
Well,
is the
let's
what
say
is
if you really hate technology and you want to end the world and you don't want any, or you want to end civilization and technology as you know it. Technology is the weapon, right? That's how you get there. The more technology, the more detached people come from nature, the harder they are to survive. I mean, eventually it'll cause this tipping point when you can't deal with it. So far, everything we've done to try to simplify our lives have made our lives far more complicated. We're getting to a point, there's a straw on the camel's back coming, where the amount of things we're doing in order to sustain not doing what we're supposed to do is just going to destroy everything, right? And we won't be able to run the systems anymore anyway. By the time that Siri works right, we won't be able to type, you know?
Yeah. Well, I've been watching I have been watching the Peaky Blinders recently. Seasons 2 through 4, I think, are really good. But anyway, like a lot of it's the aesthetics, like ooh, the 1920s. It's kind of fun to just like see a set that's pretty well done. And one of the biggest things about the show that you notice, like just in a technological or aesthetic standpoint, is just the Ford Model T and a few cars that look like it in the coming seasons. The big question is like, why did we need cars? Well, essentially, we didn't. Like, people wanted cars. Like, they could have gone on, using horses as long as they wanted to, but there was something, driving that desire to own one. Like, oh, I can go faster. What else can I do? And like, if you tried to compress it down as much, it might be, that sense of like, oh, look what I can do. And that might be a very dangerous thing. The vehicle probably led to our explosion in population that we had. And really, if we wanted to entirely change the system, we would have to take a look at that technology and say, and really actually be responsible and say, do we want to have this right now, or do we want to take our time and evaluate if it's actually good for us before we indulge that feeling of look what I can do? And that's the best way that I can put it. And I think that's been something that's been ignored since the Industrial Revolution, is like we've let the feeling of look what I could do overtake our sense of responsibility. And I don't think there's anything, pussy or hippie liberal about saying, hey, you need to have a sense of responsibility. That's something that's fucking biblical. I don't think people understand that. Like,
I think
that's called stewardship.
We also forget, I think, about malaria, right? I mean, and maybe we even underjudge it, because we say malaria has only killed half of all humans who've ever lived, which, that's probably might be an understatement. And we often will say malaria has killed like 2 billion people or 6 billion people, but it accumulates when you start to think about it. And we have often said, okay, there's been nobody up until the last century, but we don't consider whether or not there were really higher populations that have died out in pre-plagues as well. So it could be that we go through these stages, and this has been suggested by the Club of Rome's computer from the 70s. I'm not saying that 1970s computer architecture is perfect, but they were saying, hey, 2019 to 2022, there's going to be this major catastrophe. And by 2029 to 2030, something's going to happen where we don't produce enough food to feed everybody. And, when you've got 8 billion people as of August that are going to be needing food, and you have only enough food for 1 billion people or less, or 500 million people, well, that might not get evenly distributed properly. It might not make it to the people that need it. Likely you'll end up losing most of the population. And that was just part of the Club of Rome computer system. They said, hey, it's very likely that we're going to end up not being able to sustain what we think we have, right? And that's where the Marxists, and you see like Rockefeller and Lee from America starting getting involved with China, because they're saying, hey, we need to set up some sort of protective measures for certain industries for a reset or for a collapse or a crisis, right? And it becomes really difficult because we are spending so much time as Americans, at least as the West, with accumulated wealth and being able to circumvent, if not rise above the Maslow hierarchy of needs, so we don't have to worry about survival mechanisms. We're thinking about building all these wonderful things, but we're also forgetting that there are a lot of people that are dying of dysentery still. I mean, it's crazy how many people are dying. I shouldn't laugh, but I mean, go to India and Africa, people are still dying of dysentery. How is this possible? Well, how have we not fixed this by 2022?
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part, is like we've become so entrenched in the system that those problems probably aren't going to be fixed, because we get advertised the good while there is financial incentive to actually cover up the bad. And it's not even a fully conscious process. It's just like it's been a mass it's been an excess product of just having that having our greed be standardized. That's the best way to put it. Like, if say you get hired as an executive of a company, a lot of what you do can be reasonably explained by, rational self-interest. But when rational self-interest starts, becoming a huge collection, and all the problems of rational self-interest come along with that, and that extends to corporations, and that extends to your bullshit, like with formula. Oh, great fucking time. Right. Formula has been responsible for many, I would say millions of deaths due to sudden infant death syndrome in third world countries. I
thought you meant just like formula, even just abstractly. Like My Chemical Romance uses formula to make great pop songs. Are you talking about food formula? I see.
Like baby formula. Baby formula is probably
Johnson and Johnson. I'm going to pull it up so that we don't get a strike just for talking about it. I want them to know it's true. Johnson and Johnson baby formula. Let me just pull it up while you talk about it. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Explain what happened.
There's a whole YouTube video about Nestle, and I don't think it got taken down, but it's Jake Tran. He does a lot of I guess risque YouTube topics and doesn't get taken down somehow. But Nestle did have to go to court over this topic and try to defend themselves, and it looks pretty cringeworthy in hindsight.
Was it baby formula Nestle?
Yeah. Even if you go to like the Wikipedia page, because Wikipedia is totally not biased in any way whatsoever. But there's a whole story about how they came up with baby formula, and what it meant for feeding your infants, and what it meant on the grander stage of things. In my opinion, it might seem that the creation of formula was done a little bit unnecessarily. And it's, how do you research something like formula and its long-term effects, or even its sudden infant death syndrome? How do you fully research that before even putting it on the market? And I think there's a rational restriction on how well you can research products before you put them out to the public, because obviously the end goal is to try to innovate, and it's try to get market share. And there's obvious dangers that come with that. And whereas going with baby formula is obviously people have taken to using formula as a standard without evaluating the bad things. I think we all know people that have used, I was formula fed, and I knew nothing about the potential adverse effects of it, and what could be beneficial of, having breast milk or having a traditional wet nurse versus that. I'm not saying babies can decide, they can't decide. And what you instantly see anytime you're talking about formula versus breast milk, if you're a man online and you say, hey, I think there might be some, actual ethical concerns over baby formula, basically you get told to shut up because you're a man and you shouldn't have opinions about these things. I'm not trying to sound like I'm defending men or anything like that. It's just it's been beaten into people's brains that they need formula for their babies. It's this really crazy thing. And if you kind of suggest hey, we haven't looked into this, you get demonized. And that's because there's lots of cultural conditioning going on. And how do at the end of the day, how do you fight that? I that's probably something I don't even know how to approach. How do you fight that?
You just make a new culture that's more radical, and then eventually the pendulum swings back and forth. So the thing that nightmares are told about, of course, as a Californian, are and this is something I'm very open to, probably more than any of my audience or you even, and you're a very open guy. But they talked about when I was growing up, this was seriously suggested, by the way, social breastfeeding. And this came up because in California, there had been a point when in Europe, I think it's like 12 months to 6 months, that you get off when you have a baby. So you can have breastfeeding time to make sure the baby's healthy. And it's proven that breast milk both helps a baby be fortified, healthy, has natural immunities. There's a number of things there, but I'm even scared to tell you anything else because they're going to tell you, actually, no, it's totally fine to have this chemical brand and it's good for you. And it's probably at least it's maybe better. And, look at this great example of these brand sponsored Wheaties boxes covers with these people that are celebrities that have been, whatever. Okay. So I'm not saying that you can't turn out great. Look, Kurt just admitted he was, and I have a number of friends. One of my ex-bosses, not once his Connecticut mother breastfed him, not once, because they're from some, they're puritanical and weird in some places in the world, especially in New England. So he's brilliant. He's a little weird like me, but he's brilliant, and I'm breastfed. So I don't know if that really, it's not necessarily going to destroy your life. Kurt is a brilliant man who plays guitar. He was formula fed. So, but having said all that, so I don't get in trouble, I will say that social breastfeeding came up as an option in California. And there are people that don't stop breastfeeding their kids. There really are. There are people that their kids are 12, 14, 16 years old, and they're still breastfeeding. There are documentaries. I don't think you should watch them, but they exist. And what you find is people saying, hey, Freudianly speaking, it's a little weird. But once Freud gets to the sexual point, hey, Stefan gave us Don't You Dare Defend Men. Just despicable. I love that. And he's a new member, too. He's part of the Tartary royalty. So thank you very much for joining as well. If you think about it, it doesn't have to be your mother, right? And this is where it becomes social. Yeah. And so this is a thing that was suggested in the 90s in California that there would be a point when people don't stop breastfeeding. It becomes just part of inherent culture. And they might switch over and transition to their friends and partners. And this might be a thing where they become herds of people that are breastfeeding with each other, cliques, essentially, that are a part of each other that don't breastfeed other people. They specifically pick their cliques. And they had this entire scientific paper paid for by the state showing all of the ways that this could go and where it could lead in terms of health, the benefits of autoimmunities, nutrition, psychological dependency, feminism, the idea that you're no longer looking for someone to provide for, but you're looking for a provider. I mean, these kinds of things were circulated. And so what will happen, of course, is you've got a group of people so completely radical and detached from social convention that they will be completely at odds. Like, well, what's wrong with all these things? And then the other people will say, this is all the problems that we can't go and change what we've been. And then the middle will be the people that had already been convinced that baby formula was okay. I mean, if you can convince them of that, and you can probably convince them social breastfeeding is okay as well. Or who knows what else it's going to be. But it's clearly when you can convince someone that you don't have to feed your own kid. I mean, it's probably going to lead there.
Yeah. Maybe there is hope, I don't know.
I mean, I know that a big thing that they talk about, almost all royals talk about how the baby was taken from me. I wasn't allowed to suckle my own babe. And then the baby's raised less and less attached to their mother, right? And that's a big social thing.
I mean, yeah, I think that's incredibly fucked up. And I think there's a certain aspect of it, too. Like, I feel like there's a dimension of everything that's going on that the end goal, you could almost say it's a conscious end goal, maybe, that the end goal is to separate us from nature. And you mentioned that a little bit, too. And, like, what are some natural processes that make us feel vitalized, that really, I feel like there are indescribable experiences that attach you more to nature, and those can be defined as like spiritual experiences as well. They might be, maybe somewhat a little bit hardwired into the human psyche a little bit. But I think when like with the whole like monkey experiment, you know, like where there was two like uh there was like a feeding cage and that the monkey could like attach himself to, and then there was, you know, the furry one that didn't provide any food, but it was furry and it looks healthy and happy. You know, that was one of the famous psychological studies. Well, the monkey didn't cling to the thing that gave it food. The monkey clings to the thing that gave it warmth and gave it a sense of familiarity. And so I think like
when I think about Madison, Wisconsin, before I even think about the summer blockbuster parties with all the beer, I think about that dang monkey. It's just the worst possible. What was his name? Ned Kalin? Is that right? Or no, that's wrong.
Oh, I have no idea. It's been so long.
Yeah, I'll find it while you keep going.
They're one of the few studies that really sticks with you, and it just maybe not for any particular reason at the time, but the more you think about it, you're like, huh, there's something behind that. And like that's connected to, I think, a lot of the employment issues, like in third world countries, and getting work with separation from your family. Like, why are all these things built around a means of separation rather than a means of closeness and community involvement? And I think the more I think about it, the more I'm against things like globalization. I think they're actually very bad for human existence in the long term, because I think the more we gravitate ourselves to having a really, you know, catastrophic, you know, world cataclysmic event, nobody knows if World War II was the worst one. Like, it seems bad. We're like, oh, I feel like there seems to be this kind of acceptance, like, oh, glad that shit won't happen again. No, it could be worse next time. You don't know.
Did you see the episode we did a couple nights ago, Think Tank, the one that got demonetized? That had and it's funny it did, because all we talked about was the Veda, as far as I know. But did you see that part with Noel? And he was talking all about, well, we were talking a bit about Libya and India having these nuclear glassy shards from leftovers from nuclear remnants that might have wiped out entire cities. If you go to ancient origins, there's all these different cities in the middle of places that now seem barren, that we can find LiDAR water patterns, oases, everything else. And it was not that long ago. We keep doing this thing where, this is funny. So I'm no longer saying climate change. I'm just saying geoengineering, because I think we all know what that means. And it's a lot easier. You say, okay, climate change happened. And you think, okay, it took millions of years. Yeah, but geoengineering happened and it took 100 years, right? That's the difference with our.
Or there was entropy is a good word too. Like climate entropy, just because like it's warming. Warming doesn't mean the same thing as chaos, because like you need a word. You don't need word, like there's several ways to describe it, but I think if people understand what entropy is, that also helps them understand the problem. But I mean,
entropy is different. Chaos is the knot that ties grace together, but entropy is sort of the lack of efficiency of the system, right? It's like the loss in the system, and so there's a lot of loss. Yeah,
I understood the word to be like a force of entrapment. That was like my understanding of it, but like I don't know.
I think of it like as a mechanical physics. You know, if an engine has entropy, it's the amount of lost energy in the engine. But you know, there's also a certain amount of wondering where that energy is going, right? Because energy isn't really lost, so it's not being put back into the system, which is a sad thing. But it could end up in some other circumstance being utilized by nature. Who knows, right? Like a candle burning. Maybe that entropy is the feng shui.
Yeah. Well, I think we're used to like having more energy loss back into space, I guess, than we traditionally have. And if it doesn't get back out in space, then it causes more evaporation, and evaporation causes a lot of other bullshit, you know.
But this is space. So the energy is going into the air, and you've got ionized oxygen, ionized nitrogen. You got free radical energies that are your ionization is going into things. We absorb energy. It's an amazing capability. Theoretically, you can charge yourself. This is something that they've talked about, that you could actually electrocute yourself and get energy from that to some extent, cause ATPs to break down or even to store. Oh, I did want to say, because I keep forgetting, World War II, great segue because of the baby formula thing. Because, of course, getting women to work all the time, big thing. I mean, in the 1800s as well, but in the 20th century, the women in the workforce thing was the biggest push and the most successful of all the generations that they've tried to tax women, to tax the other half of the population. And getting them out of the family, right, and getting them into the workplace. This is a big thing right now, saying, hey, it's expensive to have a daycare center for a kid for 18 years or less, whatever it close. But if it's just we get rid of the kid, then you can go back to work, right? So it's it's efficient. It's great for the system.
And I think we've been demonized. Well, some of those ideas have been demonized. Like why? Like what's in a vacuum? In a vacuum, what's wrong with a mother caring for her child? Like when you frame it that way, hey, mothers caring for their children, that's a good thing, right? Well, it seems like there's a lot of other like perimeters, like psychological things wanting to get in and saying like, no, that's we're trying to change shit. And like I feel like women have been treated a lot like shit, like throughout history. Like it's inevitably true, but at the same time, it's like there's been such a one-dimensional approach to women's liberation that I think we're missing a lot of really good things here. And on a side note, like you mentioned that, like how feminist are you? Like I'm so feminist, I think women should be tax-free. Maybe that would make the system better.
I'm as feminist as enough to believe I think women should exist still, and I think that's kind of the thing. Like for a while, I grew up in California. I'm very open. I was raised to be. My mom's an obstetrician and gynecologist who went to school in like 3 different countries. Like I can respect that women are capable. My mom is more capable than most men that you'll meet. It has nothing to do with capability to me. It always had more to do with infrastructure of the state, whether or not social classes and the family nucleus were able to intervene. I have a family from Yugoslavia. In Soviet countries and in Yugoslavia, very briefly, they tried to make marriage illegal because they thought it was a waste of time. And then they started working on these civil unionships. And eventually they just said, hey, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to let people get married, but we'll just make divorce as easy as getting you sign a piece of paper. It's done. You get married, you sign a piece of paper, it's done. You get divorced. So they made it very easy, and that was an effective trick, and they brought that over as well. But I became critical of feminism after Kurt Cobain died. Also, Kurt Cobain was a feminist. I think I'm like on that level, I'm like Neil Gaiman's Sandman. That's how woke I am. I'm 1982 woke. I'm Fine Young Cannibals woke, but I'm not pushing it. But women have now been, and I criticize a certain number of positive sex feminists, like Susan Bright is a professor at UCSD that I know very well. I've always been a proponent of Anne Simonton. She's a great negative sex feminist, third wave negative sex feminist. I mean, I'm very open to feminist studies from the 80s and 90s, particularly from victims, right, of the industrialization of the vagina, as Sheila Keel called it in her book. I still think, though, we hit a plateau. And there was a point where feminism, this is why we're here, because we got so high. People like, hey, feminists are becoming too much. Well, that's right when the trans agenda started to annihilate the concept of femininity, right? Because what we have then is you have the transvestite facade, which is a completely other thing. And this is interesting that they have, drag queen shows have somehow been married to the idea of femininity. That has nothing to do with transgender, right? You don't have to dress in a dress. You could if you wanted to as a guy. What does that have to do with anything? It has to do with social conservative normativity. And so they've decided as conservatives, trans are conservatives. They're trying to conserve social ideological values of the society by changing the self to conform to the state, right? Which is a very old patented trick. It's a fascistic trick. It's a collective trick. It has nothing to do with love. It doesn't have to do with gay. It doesn't have to do with rights. It has anything else. It's just a ideological political trick. And then you've got people saying, hey, you don't have to conform to the values of society. Well, that's being contested by the trans movement. They're saying, no. If you're this way, you have to choose to transition. And no, you don't. You don't have to do anything but be yourself and die. And it's just, that's the problem. We've moved so far away from that logic. And it used to be the only logic that you had. It's like, hey, we're going to try to let you keep living as long as possible being yourself. because otherwise witch trials. And so we were trying to allow for a certain amount of self-determination. That's all been pulled into question. And so feminists have become important again. Then you've got J.K. Rowling, you have a trans-exclusive radical feminists like TERFs. Well, yeah, all of a sudden you have a little sympathy there for a TERF, because you're like, these feminists who maybe have pushed it too hard, said men are so terrible. Well, now you're like, hey, we tried to warn you. so all of a sudden, so on that level, I think I sympathize with fifth wave vapor Sharia feminism.
Yeah, I had to put a picture in my brain of a TERF, so and then immediately, J.K. Rowling, that's what it is. All right.
Exactly. Trans-exclusive radical feminist TERFs are more common than people will admit. There are tons of girls that in 2012, 2016 were TERFs. They didn't know it yet, and they didn't realize what was coming. And now they have to be quiet because they were championing for trans rights and for women's rights and for et cetera, stopping the white male from being the trouble. And now they're kind of in this awkward position where it's going to be the white male, or it doesn't really mean white, but it's going to be the dynamic. If the feminine needs to be saved, the masculine is going to need to participate in the saving. Triumph of the Will was shot by a woman. Like, to show the Ubermensch, it required a feminine perspective. It will always require dynamic. Dynamic is the only thing. So, feminism is important in a sense because we need to protect the idea of femininity. But it's interesting because people keep laughing at that question, what is a woman? Because that documentary, what is a woman? Which a lot of people like. And I'm not going to say anything too messed up, but I'm sorry. It is a Michael Moore style documentary. And people that say it's not are missing. Have you seen it? What is a woman?
No, it's not something I would ever have the desire to see.
It's not bad, and I respect and agree with some of the opinions, but it is a Michael Moore style cut to cut. But keep going.
No, like, I would characterize myself as being somewhat, maybe a little more neutral on anything topic of transgenderism or defining a woman. Closer to neutral, maybe like a little bit more like conservative, because in that respect. And like, I could go into all the details. It's easier just to describe what I felt when I seen the headlines of what is a woman. It literally felt like, and this is my problem also with like the whole movement behind figures like Ben Shapiro too. It's because like it feels like it's trying so hard to hit the right market. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we've already addressed a lot of those questions as a culture, and like we've already seen all the memes of people just like saying, hey, I don't like trans people. Like, that this was a conversation that's been going on for the last 2 years, and then the documentary comes out of what is a woman. Like, you've already been arguing your point this entire time. You don't need the fucking documentary.
We're in an insular group. So APM, Advanced Philosophy Memes, is kind of like the comic book that Life is based the movie on. And so we say with everything we've been talking about has become the interjection. Like, they're trying to get it out there and they're paying people to make movies about it. But there's a problem there where it's different. And that is that in APM, I don't censor a lot. I'm trying to fix that to an extent so we keep the group up. But in general, I'm allowing, if you're a radical TERF, if you're a radical Marxist, if you're a radical trans, if you're pretty right wing, you're allowed to have a discourse, because I think that's kind of been the point. We come from that kind of Vedic, participatory, sophist dialogue thing where you want to have the hash out. People can come to it, read it later, and see what truth was found in between the milieu, right? That's what we were trying to do. Unfortunately, people will look at that and say, hey, they agree with the person because they let them say their piece. And I honestly feel like this is a kind of what happened in What is a Woman, because there are some scenes where, and you've got these people saying ridiculous things, and it's all the compounded ridiculous things they're saying. Agreed, admittedly. But what about the middle parts that matter? Because there are these pieces there they're trying to talk about, which is that to say, what is a woman is a social value. It's something that we're valuing as a society. That's huge. That would have been a bigger argument, because then you could have said back, well, women have been valued because they made it possible for humanity to exist. So that's why we've called them women, because the thing is they're producing men, right? And without them, the womb of the men, right? I mean, it's not that everyone has to do that. It's not that everyone is expected to be, but that's a very valuable trophy position to have. You're producing humanity. So it's been a valued role in society that people have tended to in certain ways, vied for, exploited, admittedly, but it's still a thing that exists. And they're trying to take that away. Somebody get rid of these spam chats. Would you? I'm going to block them. There's a dating site. It's gone.
Well, on a subtle note, sorry.
Unless it's a trans dating site. If it's a trans dating site, it's allowed to stay because I don't commit hate crimes.
No, like in an essence of like pure power, like women, because they have the biological gift of carrying, you know, a baby at term, they literally control the future. Like, I think that's actually a great way to describe it. Women literally control the future of humanity because, like, we can't do anything, and like we're ending our existence if they don't give birth. I'm not saying that to be offensive in any way. That's just like I think that's really like factual information. And I don't know where was I. But yeah, I was trying to go off of your point by saying that, like, I think, like, and that was something. The crazy thing about that is, like, it's something that women don't all. I don't think people as a society necessarily realize it. Like, we're just conditioned to be in our certain modes and just keep the ball rolling. And like we rarely take time to actually sit down and say, like, oh wow, what is the fundamental nature of our very existence? And then once you start asking those real big questions, what's the fundamental nature of existence, then you start thinking about things like gender and sex. I think you have a much less biased perspective about what the real value is. And so from that perspective, it's like, holy shit, to our species, like, if we're just splitting everything into like sex and having, you know, like sexual and gender issues, we can much more appreciate what that value is. If we value ourselves as a species and we value our existence, we have to make sure that womanhood is something. From that logical conclusion, we could almost make womanhood something that's sacred. And
except Emily points out, now we're incubating babies in robots. We might be obsolete, sadly. It was fun, you guys. So, I mean, maybe we are headed towards an antinatalist phase. Is that going to destroy our capacity to hold the sacredness of the human condition, the female condition, the woman, right?
I think so. No, I think and this is just, I'm going to speak from more like instinctual terms, or like maybe more like psychedelic terms, but like the more things are made to be unnatural, the more I think it ends up being damaging in the long run, and at some point it becomes unsustainable. Like when we look at things like test tubes, or things like baby formula that we've been talking about, or things like growth hormone that's been getting into our crops. We've been seeing every time we make a new technological discovery, the same thing with clean drinking water. There's always something about nature that seems more intelligent than we are. When we first standardized clean drinking water for the wide masses, one of the first things that happened is, like, all of a sudden everybody started getting a smallpox outbreak. And the reason why is because before everybody started getting smallpox, what was happening is they were getting very slightly dirty water from the time that they were born. They were getting little doses of just enough, like, you know, smallpox that they could. I might be thinking of a different thing, but we'll just call it smallpox for now. But it was either smallpox or one of the other big ones that's not really around anymore. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah, I think it was polio.
I want to get it right. I do want to get it right, but I mean,
is it polio?
I'll just call it fucking the one that paralyzes people.
I think it might be polio, but smallpox.
Polio is the one. Yeah, polio is the one.
Polio, they put you in the giant iron lungs, and there are people, like my dad knew as a kid. He'd go over to someone's house, and the dad or grandpa or uncle or wife or something would be in this machine in the middle of the house, pushing on them this iron lung. Right? It's horrifying.
Right. So when people were babies, when they were infants, they would get little amounts of polio in their water, or maybe even in their breast milk. I don't know. I don't know that much to that degree. I don't know, but they were getting it. That's the end goal. They were getting little bits of those amounts, and so their body was able to essentially treat that small dose of polio as a natural vaccine. Their body ended up being prepared for it. When they got clean drinking water that didn't have polio in it, all of a sudden, when children first got exposed to it at a later age, their immune systems were not prepared for it. That's an example of technology expanding and us not knowing the full consequences of it. I think most of us now would say, yes, we'll take clean drinking water. Like we'll take a higher risk of polio because clean drinking water ends up giving us an insane net benefit, even though it might have exposed that weakness. But we can only say that in hindsight. We don't know how bad other things end up getting in hindsight with our technological advances. And now we're starting to see things like, obviously, for several reasons, like we're starting to get puberty and puberty at an earlier age because of all these
9
things.
years old and things. It's crazy. Inside of the Ages says the womb man admired man enough to take the time to write his story. That's pretty good. I like it. But yeah, we did. We started to have puberty hit earlier. You've got 9-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and they've shown in general places where it's less common. It's common. It's just regressing in general. But in other circumstances where children experience puberty early, it's usually because of trauma, post-traumatic stress, being in a war-torn country, etc., having to grow up early, right, as soon as possible.
Yeah. And we're starting to see. I think we're starting to see a culmination of a lot of these things. We're starting to pay the price of not doing our due diligence as a species and being cautious and being a good stewards of our overall environment. And so now, what do we have a huge surplus of right now? We have a giant explosion of mental health disorders, and I don't think that's because of measurement bias. I think it's legitimately there, and we have an explosion of addiction disorders. And it's due to a lot of reasons. You could say there's a lot of economic factors that go into that, but I think a lot of it is due to an advancement of technology before we're prepared for it, and also, Sorry, my mind is going so many different directions right now.
What's the other way?
I might have to restart the sentence in order to do it right.
Go for it.
But yeah, a technological advancement before we're prepared for it, and the other thing would be, but I mean that was the main point of what we were going off of. Yeah,
I think of the Vril Society, Maria Orsich, and the Thule Society, and what they were doing in Germany in the 1890s. They had this oracle from Croatia who was half Austrian, half Croatian lady, totally 100% hot. Maria Orsich, definitely look her up. Yeah. But she was a medium, and she did all this research, and she would hold this seance while with the energy from the Pleiades, etc. And there's this real spirit energy that she's talking to through radio on this. And these groups of people that were all into this stuff are the people who went on in Italy and America and in Argentina to work on to invent the radios and television, because they were trying to pick up on ESP or crazy, remote viewing. They wanted technology to look through remote viewing purposes. Maria Orsich comes back to this group at the seance, and they're all writing down what she's saying. And, they're like, trying to get information. Like, what is it? Well, it's called the Vril. Where are they? Well, they're the Hyperborean. They're connected from the Thule. What do they want? Well, they're trying to give me this message. Well, what is it? Well, it's a vacuum, And so like, wait, what? And so you start looking into what the message was. And the message was to produce a bunch of things that would disrupt the home. And this isn't supposed to be from some corporation that's sinister. This is supposed to be from maybe the Dracos or the Vril. I mean, they could be evil, but they could be good. It's kind of the Ouija board there where you're talking to spirits that are giving you new technology. But the idea is that it would stop humans from having to spend all their time working, because you'd eventually have these systems that would replace it. And they start giving you more and more examples of how you'd have food that would last a lot longer. So you could have food just waiting for you whenever you want it. You could get it all stored once, and then you'd have food for the rest of your life because it'll be powdered. And all these kinds of things that started to appear, and what the disruption was. And you're forced to wonder, was this in order to help humanity, or was this in order to enslave humanity and take them away from the natural system so they're not able to function, right?
Oh, totally. And like, I do feel like a lot of people are skeptical to the idea of an oligarchy running everything, but I think there's There's
I
legitimate.
wonder what the options. What's the other option again? What else is there? Besides the oligarchy, what else you got? Oligarchy. Hold on. Also, inside of ages, it's a man and machine, woman and child. The way you know you've made a good machine is if it's good for the child. That is the circle and balance. Yes, good fruit, good tree. I think that's true. But yeah, so technology, do you think it's disrupting us because we're not ready for it? You think that's part of the plan? And this oligarchy, what else is there?
I think in hindsight, it's definitely moved too fast. And we failed to address a lot of our core spiritual issues, like in tandem with that. I think we can have cool things. We can have cool technology. We can have, electric vehicles. we can have means of transportation, but what does that transportation mean? Like, you can't have a bullet train that takes you to the other side of the planet. That's going to give you a sense of purpose. Like, for most people, like, if let's say theoretically that we have a huge sense of purpose in simply passing off our DNA, and engaging with our families and seeing that the next generation does really well. What the fuck does technology help us out with, like, in terms of that grand scheme? It doesn't really help us at all. Like, it might help us get, like, perspective. It'll help out the forces of globalization, but, like, we've already talked about globalization and how it might not be a force that's good for that overall, tribalism of, like, okay, we just want to make it to the next generation and make sure that they're happy and that they're loved and that, they have, if we're thinking in Maslow's hierarchy, well, if that is, I think it's a pretty good, thing to base off life meaning. If Maslow's hierarchy is legitimate, then technology doesn't fit into any of that, really. The only way you could argue is that, yeah, maybe we can kind of standardize food to a certain degree, but we're seeing kind of problems with that. We're seeing that in order to fully control the food supply, we would also have to control the population, and there are severe ethical concerns with that. So, like, technology might have just been a means of accelerationism, and it doesn't address our constant core crisis of meaning. And the way you address core crisis of meaning is to actually, well, you could say there's a spiritual element there, and you can't necessarily fully define it with words, but it's something that you have to address. You have to stop having endless forms of distraction in order to address those problems. And I think that's where
it says, enjoy the fruits of your labor, right? Solomon says, the only thing worth anything is to enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Yeah. More to life than labor, that's for sure. But when we have conversations like this, like, words have a meaning in one context and they have a meaning in another context, and that's what's difficult about them. But I think there's been a contrast between Western and Eastern philosophies, and I think there hasn't been as much integration between the good parts of Western philosophy and the good parts of Eastern philosophy, because I think there hasn't been a synthesis of the better parts of those things. And I think if we do get a good synthesis of that, then we might end up with a better end product where, people are more stable, and out of that stability we can have happiness and meaning and those things. Because right now, I think, not to get, like, too go into too far into other topics or related topics, but, like, I think one of the biggest examples of how nihilistic we become as a society, I think, is just what the dating expectations have been. And I'm not even complaining. I'm beyond complaining about it. Like, I'm trying to observe it from as much of an objective standpoint as possible. When I ask people about their lives and what they're experiencing and what makes them happy, why they're in, like, the relationships that they are in, when they are in relationships, and why those relationships last, the more I see lots and lots of trauma. And I'm not even joking there. Like, trauma is a very real thing, and it impacts people so deeply that the only way that I can interpret it is, like, I don't know. I've really had to do some fucked up shit in my life to make myself feel like an okay person. Because like if you're around other people that have had those traumatic experiences, you almost don't even want to believe that it happened, but it happens all the fucking time. One of my best friends, and I think it's okay to talk about in the show. I'll just say one of my best friends, she's a little bit relative to the guy she's dating, like much older fucking guy. He's 2/3 of the way to retirement. And when I think maybe sometimes that situation can work out, you know, sometimes if things align, maybe sometimes it can work out.
If the dude's responsible and mature, I mean, that's he's got more going for him than anybody at any age usually. So you never know. But usually at that point, are you mature? I don't know. Depends.
No. Well, that's another problem is like you can be a 45-year-old and also still have an infant mentality.
Yeah.
And
especially if you're dating infants or young people.
Yeah. Like literally he's double her age and has children that are almost her age. And I think there's that is pretty much the nail in the coffin of the situation, is because if you take the approach that children can give you meaning in life, and that in some ways like helps out our species, like is to take joy in the fact that you raise someone correctly and that they're going to be a good influence on the next generation. This person has already experienced that. He's already experienced a couple of children, and if he doesn't have that sense of meaning in his life, if he doesn't feel like those children have brought him meaning, then how is that going to transition to your relationship?
Right.
Like, what? Also, any dude in his 40s, like, I think people are measurable a lot of times to a certain degree. Like, if you have the chance to be with a hot young girl and you're over the hill and you have depression, you're like, what the fuck am I going to do with life? Oh, I'm going to have sex with a hot young woman. And literally in 99 times out of 100, that's going to be the mentality. They're going to say yes, and all of those reasons are reasons that do not include the reason of I love you. I actually love you as a person. And that's just one example.
I hate what I did. I want to change it. I want to go back, and here's someone young. I can go back and be young again. I can redo. And so it's not about loving you, it's about hating myself for what I've done, kind of a thing. Right.
I think you get it perfectly. And like the reason I bring up that example is because the more I tried to think about that situation, the more it was just like, why the fuck are you doing this? And I don't think people are fully aware of how their trauma affects them. And that situation is not necessarily similar to everyone's situation, but it's one where there's such a deep-rooted trauma, probably in both parties, to where like you can't even begin to try to approach it.
Right.
And I feel like that's very, very common. And the more I talk to people on the dating scene, is the more they seem to apply their certain level of trauma to how they're interpreting how healthy the relationship is, even though the relationship might not be healthy at all. It might be terrible for them. It might be driving them off a cliff. And that's as far as I'll speak on that situation.
Right. And this is a limited thing. Obviously, this doesn't happen very often. It's usually very good. By the way, this has nothing to do with this, but I want to really quickly congratulate Dan Cook being engaged to his 20-year-old girlfriend. Now he's 53.
Exactly. That is the fucking situation. Like somehow. All right. So I'm sorry if I don't mean to dominate the conversation. If
no. This is great. Yeah. I mean, this is it. People care about these things. I had a friend who did the same thing, and she recently passed away, which is a tragedy for other reasons. But she was, had been through a lot and dated a guy who was twice or something her age because she needed some stability, didn't trust people her own age because they were all immature. Particularly Californians are trained not to become mature and to try to obsess over your throwaway decade, which is like throwing away life, in a lot of ways, to not prepare. So, by the time she was about 30, she's like, okay, I gotta find a guy who's like 50 who knows what he's doing and got his life together or something like that. And I wouldn't say it was the worst possible thing ever, but it's just scraping by with the bare minimum. Like they finally figured out how to take care of themselves. It's kind of like warlord thing. You're like, well, we live in this apocalyptic warlord period and everything is horrible. So I got to find somebody who can protect me. And, it's cool. Maybe there's love there to an extent because you can learn to love anybody, but it can be a lot,
Yeah, well, like in our society, like in the society of the United States, where we won so many fucking wars and apparently have so much fucking wealth, why would you need that in order for a sense of security? Why would you need to date Dane Cook in order to get your sense of security? I mean, like if someone did bring up the possibility of a conscious effort at gold digging even from a young age, that might be really offensive to think about. But like, I don't know, I mean, like maybe
so these Tinder posts, they say trophy wife or potential or trophy wife or whatever. People, that's a thing. Like they ideologically are thinking to themselves, future trophy wife, I think is what the thing is. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of it might be the sense that things are really squeezing together. Maybe there is the sense that an apocalyptic event is actually fucking coming, and that's why the dating standards have changed so much. It's like I want to be literally with the top 1% of society because
how
that's
old
the
did
only
Socrates
way.
say it though? Socrates said marriage should be between like a 50-year-old man and a 28 or 29-year-old woman. Is that right?
I mean, that would be a lot more appropriate than the age numbers that we're talking about a lot of the time. Like, even if we're taking societal standards out of it, I don't know. I think experience might tell me and you as older men now, because I think we're both in our 30s, right? I think there's a certain there's just a certain life force that you experience the older that you get, and it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters that much which time period or which culture you would randomly put yourself into. I think that constant force that you're experiencing is a standard from society to society. So like I think it was Confucius was the one that was born out of like a 70-year-old dad and like a 15-year-old mom.
Yeah, Socrates says not to have don't be a daddy after 55. So
okay,
breaking
like he might have been on to something. That I'm just saying he might have been on.
I mean, women about 28 are different, right? Like I just remember being younger and thinking the dating scene was a lot more difficult in the teens and 20s, and then around 28 to 30, I think people sort themselves out or they don't, and so you start it depends maybe. But I think also the goals change a bit towards family a lot more. Maybe that's just now. But it seems like that's maybe a reasonable thing. But my mom being an OBGYN, she had me at 40, 41. And that's pretty late in general. But she's an OBGYN, so it worked out. But so many other people asked my mom, when should they have kids? And she said, well, I've seen a lot of people come in, have kids at 17, 18 or whatever. And then they go to college after their kids, once their kids go to kindergarten. And so then when the kids are going to school, they go to school. And so they've had that time with their kids before college. And then they can go off and they can spend a lot of time simultaneously, which is interestingly enough the same model as the home improvement family, right? I think that's what they did. Jill does that. But we think about it like, oh yeah, we should wait as long as possible to have kids. So that's the biggest issue. I think that's why Socrates explains like, well, don't wait too long. Don't be 55. Don't be 40 when you get married, because it's going to be a lot more difficult to have kids if that's your goal. But maybe it's not everybody's goal, and clearly today it's not.
Definitely not. And this is a very engaging conversation, and like that's been great. But it's a great conversation because like it's been easy for me to go like down several different lines of thought at the same time. But where I was going with all of that, and like what I mentioned, like with trauma, like and how powerful of a force trauma is, it's like, okay, how do I separate my own ego from a lot of these forces? Oh, can you hear me right now?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. My phone's just being dumb. The way I separate myself and my own ego from this problem is, if I make it my goal to try my best in order to heal the world, all of a sudden these situations in which they feel so unjust and they feel like maybe I'm just like sulking into how the state of the world, it becomes easier because like I feel like in order for these things to get better, there's a lot of people that really need to be the adult in the room and accept these situations, accept that they are bringing a lot of people pain, and try to be the comforting force behind it, even if you're not necessarily in the position that you want to be, or you're getting your baser instincts satisfied. Because I think in the wider scheme of things, like just going out and trying to get laid or trying to get pussy, like I think those are things that they really create demons for a lot of people, because like what ends up happening is they think the sexual process will end up being what heals their thoughts, or it's going to be what heals this growing sense of like, oh shit, the end of the world is coming, what do I do? Or the sense of the eternal sense of dread.
Maybe trying to remove and replace the trauma from before, because there's probably already existing preliminary trauma in that department. And it's the idea that maybe we can make it better. I was also going to say, Emily said, after 36, a woman's chance of having twins goes up. And then she points out Halle Berry, Julia Roberts, Angelina Jolie. I would say after 36, if you're taking hormone medicines that are supposed to help you have children, I think hormone medicines in general increase the likelihood of having twins, but I could be wrong. But if that's the truth, and I don't know, then maybe 37 is the sweet spot. So good, get some twins going. That's great.
Yeah, maybe hormones aren't so bad if we can have twins after 30.
I mean, the quintuplets and the septuplets and all that stuff. I mean, I'm pretty sure that has to do with taking medicine to make, it's a lot of times someone who was unable to have a kid, they take some medicine, and then they're having a lot of kids, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and just the ability to have children, it's just like, and that relates to what we were saying earlier. It's like, I think you can tell it's just like such a powerful force for a lot of women, because like, again, one of my bosses, she had like 7 children, and going up on the age of 40, she ended up having another child. And I think for a lot of women, if they feel like they have the resources to have children, they naturally, a lot of times they naturally want to, if they're already having them, because they want. It feels like you're doing it. Like what other power matches the power of literal creation? Like that's what you're doing, and I could understand for a lot of people how it's hard to let go of that. And there are a lot of people that decide to only have 1 or 2 children, but like it seems like I feel so bad talking about this, because like I feel like this is like a sensitive like topic, but when the time comes for like menopause, like it hits a lot of people hard, even if they're done like having children. It's like having that ability to have children, it's like it feels like such a sacred and like sacred and like almost like ancient thing, because it is an ancient thing. It's hard to let go of that. It's like there's a fear of losing your universal connection out there. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not actually a universal disconnect. And I think we might be on the same boat. I don't think we even believe that death is a universal disconnect. You could see it as a universal reunification of sorts. But yeah, we can talk about that a lot. But you take it from here.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about that too. I mean, I was watching The Sandman recently, and I love the comic book, and I think they did a pretty decent job with the modern show. There's some things, what it is. But the script is pretty close to the comic book, almost identical, and that's what matters. So there's the scene where dream is going to see his sister, Death, because it's like dream, destiny, death, despair, delirium, desire, and then what's the other one? It's like, despair. I got that. Okay, so whatever. Anyway, he goes and sees Death, and Death's job is to go grab people as they're dying. And she's going through the day, just like thousands of people are dying. You see like 3 or 4 examples of people, she's like, hey, it's time. And the person's like, oh, not yet. It's like, everybody gets a life, no more, no less. He goes to an old man, goes to a young guy who's with his wife on their honeymoon. And he's like, please, I got to tell my wife the code to my phone. It's the plane information. She won't be able to leave our honeymoon. Sorry, it's too late. You drowned in the river. It's time. And then this baby, she's like, yeah, I know. Sorry, it's unreasonable. I know it's just such a short life. It's all you get. I know it's unfair kind of, but it is what it is. You got some life. And it's weird because we think of death as this, again, you said it, this big disconnect, but it is only from our own tabula rasa. I don't want to say tabula rasa, but our tabula. We've created this memory system. We've got the, whether it's true or not, right now could have been the newest moment, but it might have been the only moment. And everything behind it might have happened, but it might have also just been synthetic memory to assist in your programming for this moment right now. And we're saying, hey, you know, we're dead, we're alive, these things are happening. But aren't we just constantly seeing the same material that makes up everything make its way back into life, make its way back into things that make its way back into people? I mean, you know, is it too druidic, or what is the substance of humanity? Because I don't think it's the memory, and not literal material memory.
Yeah, I just got introduced to the Druids like 2 weeks ago, off of what is it, Stanley P. Hall? Is that his name? Or it's like
Manly P. Hall. Sorry.
Yeah, Manly P. Hall. Yeah.
You said it so close, it freaked me out. I was like, I know it's not, but what is Manly? Yeah, Manly.
Yeah, Manly P. Hall. No, they seemed like they were
ages. Yeah.
No, that seemed like some wild shit. Like, one of the coolest time periods probably that you could learn about anything is to like learn what the Druids actually like taught in their entirety. I think that'd be pretty dope.
Right, which is really hard to do, of course, because the Catholic Church has taken everything. So most of the best things that we have about the Druids are just from the Jesuit library and published in the last 10 years. So much of what we thought of, and technically they never called themselves Druids. That's like the name of a kind of, it's associated, but it's not the name of their overall community and religion. And so there was a lot of weird New Agers that were trying to recreate Druidism in the 20th century. I think Manly P. Hall did his best to actually connect it to Tertullian and Patrick, because there were Romans that came to Ireland and they infiltrated and they wrote some heresy texts about what the locals were doing. And so that's, for the most part, aside from the stuff that's come out in the last few years, you know, that's pretty much all we had to go on what the Druids were, because all their books that weren't burned were taken to the Vatican Library and just have been hidden, because they have a collection of all of this. There are so many religions that we don't know the names of, that were the local religions of places, that are completely archived in the Vatican Library, you know, because they exist in this sort of storage, but they don't want you to know about them, right?
It seems pretty wild. It seems pretty cool, but like, it's all. Oh no! In that book, I'm straying a little bit, but like, he talked about ever burning lamps, like in found in pyramids and shit, and like it seemed cool. Apparently, he had like a recipe, but it's like that seems to be like number one thing you could see like on the History Channel, where they just like do a special, you know, and they just never like did one, and that it seems to be weird because like anytime like they take every chance they can to talk about aliens.
On Druids or Manly P. Hall? Which part?
Oh, on actually like well, Druids, yeah, but like on ever burning lamps. Like,
right.
I think
they've had a thing that they showed, you know, the carbon doesn't exist, so it was clearly these Baghdad batteries. Ancient aliens, they're always talking about the pyramids that have no carbon scoring. I guess it's a little silly, but Ancient Aliens, you know, it's a fun title, but they do go into the temple and they show the pyramid. There's like, it's not a museum, it's not a mausoleum, it's not a funeral parlor. This is a giant industrial building that had some sort of purpose, right? And that picture, let me see if I can find it. The Egyptian light bulb hieroglyph. You've seen that, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Maybe.
Pretty famous picture. And it's these guys here holding up this giant phallic eggplant with a snake in it, right? I mean, that's what they want you to think. But then you look a little closer. Like, oh, okay, yeah, these are essentially two, and they usually see one side or the other side, but they're sending data back and forth. Is, you know, one of the possible hypotheses that these are not just light bulbs, but they might have to do with actual resonance cathode ray tubes. But they try to say, oh, this is an eggplant or a lotus and is a snake, and he's got this vine that's coming here. I say that that's part of the plan, that you've got this mystical metaphor for what's going on over here, where you've got people actually communicating with these giant electrical systems. And these are all found in parts of the caves of the pyramids where there is no carbon from torches. And so they think, hey, well, maybe they're trying to show you how it works, is they have this electrical system that's actually sending wireless electricity back and forth, right?
Huh. Yeah. It's a lot of wild stuff out there. Yeah, that was going. We were that was a derivative from our point about like what's like what death means and how we interpret it, and like I think there's so many ways to put it that can sound cliche, but like where I am now is like I think once you've been exposed to the idea of how little you know about everything in the universe in general, and how like really in the grand scheme how small you are, well then you can appreciate how much you don't know what your death ultimately means. If you don't know what your death can ultimately mean, it could mean a lot more than what you think it does. And I think that's, I don't think a lot of people, it's hard to think about death if we have like a natural drive to not think about it or fight against it. But like if we really wrestle with it and we grapple with like that aspect of it and we want to live, you know, more fuller lives, I think that's a good way to approach it. Is like I think obviously like, and that's the book you recommended. Like I've read probably like 14 pages so far, but so far I can tell like it has a pretty interesting take on stuff.
Is it Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, or
no, Valis?
Oh, Valis, Philip K. Dick Valis. Oh yeah, right. Amazing, right?
Yeah. So far, like it seems like one I'm definitely going to make it the whole way through in the next couple weeks, because it's pretty engaging so far. But the way he talks about the girl, I forget her name, but like the one that commits suicide at the beginning of the book, and how there was all at that point it was almost like she was a shell of her former self. And what that means is like, this isn't to say that people shouldn't kill themselves just to make other people happy. It's that I think a lot of people's perspectives could be changed if they had a full understanding of what their death could mean. And like, if we believe in God and we believe like that the universe is very like integrated and God has integrated that universe, well, then theoretically, yeah, like the choices that you made in some sense, they'll affect the molecules that are going out in the air forever. Everything that you touch will never quite be the same because you touched it, if you have the ability to think of it in that manner. And that goes, but that anything you can say that about the physical realm, you could apply it to the social realm as well. If you value humanity and you value like our social construct that we have, then you can, in some sense, you can never understand. You can understand more fully if you are willing to approach it, that each and every action that you perform in the context of society, it does have an impact. It has reverberating impacts. And now I'm just repeating a lot of what other people said. Not
butterfly effect.
Yeah, it's the butterfly effect, but I don't think people understand the real weight of it, and they don't take the time to measure. Well, a lot of times measure and see the excess effects of it, because I really think the more you or anyone else develops a pattern-based thinking about things in general, and you try to attach meaning to certain things, the more you realize in the long term, like, wow, like there are subconscious processes that get affected by your actions as a person. And it's hard to see those things immediately, but I think over time, like sometimes a lot of those things really do come back to you, and that's related to the law of attraction. And that's I can tell you a great story about it. I want to give you a chance to.
No, I want to hear the story of the law of attraction. I mean, I could say really quickly with the law of attraction that I believe in it. I remember, when Oprah made a video about it, I was like, oh my God, they're bringing up the law of attraction. They're going to teach all these materialists about how they can get more of the Illuminati's money. So it's like you can get more of our power and it's invested. But I used to think about it a lot. Like I'd be driving from Santa Cruz up in the Bay Area down to San Diego. It's like 400 or 500 miles, 600, 500 miles. And sometimes I would go and there'd be nobody because I'd know I'm going against the current. Everyone's coming up here for a reason, or everyone's staying where they are for a reason. And it'd be almost no one on the road besides a few truckers. And other times it would be like, wow, it's a full moon and people are going down to the full moon gathering or something like that. Or there's a bunch of family going to a vacation. It's a 3-day weekend. And you'd get on the highway and it would just be, you're pulled into the current and you're pushed with them to where they're going, and it's almost easier because everyone's pushing the flow the same direction. And so the law of attraction really sticks out to me as being not just things you want, but things you're thinking about that you're attracted to, right? And you can be forced to think about things. So that was my thought on the law of attraction, but continue your story.
Oh, for sure. My story is, and it kind of happened recently, but like the part of life that I've really been struggling with is like, I feel like in the book of Alice, it mentions that the first thing to disappear when it comes to losing your sanity is your sense of familiarity. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing, like, and that totally made sense, like, for like a lot of my psychological sphere, because, and that's where it has like affected my dating life to a certain degree too. Sorry, I don't mean to make this like a therapy session, but I mean, like, if you develop a sense of familiarity with like 5 people in the span of like 5 years, that's that sense of familiarity, like readjusting itself on a very constant basis. And I think that really takes a toll on me, but it takes a toll on everybody, everybody who experiences it. So, like, for me, the way I try to cling to sanity is to rationally think out, okay, how am I getting the necessary amounts of familiarity in my life and in those relationships?
Or just becoming familiar with things more often. See, that's, some people are always like, why do you care what the new pop song or the new pop actress is? Like, you know, if you're desperate to stay familiar after 30, you got to know what what the nonsense is. That's why only reason I know what's going on Twitter.
Yeah, I think it's important to, like, on some level, connect with generations. I think that's really how you impact like young people. Is like, even if you think their music's garbage, like if you have a really relatable take on why you think it's bad, I think they're much more likely to like listen to that. You know, like.
Yeah. I think a lot of young people, you know, I remember being young and not knowing things that had happened before me. I'm pretty good at history and all, but you know, it's because of the experiences I have that I've been able to look at history differently and say, hey, this was a fake news story in the 70s, you know, obviously. I know now because I saw a fake news story in the 2015 I was intimately aware of, you know. So the same thing is going on with these kids. And they're like, wow, this could be a really good thing. Be careful. Don't forget what happened to, you know, Ralph Nader or something. I don't know. And someone's like, who's Ralph Nader, or who's you know, whatever, any Ross Perot, doesn't matter. Like, no, most of them have no context, zero context before Obama left office. So,
well, that was like, I was born in 1990, and so the first time I heard of Ross Perot, it was actually kind of mind blowing. Like, wow, this guy was a third party.
There are people born on September 11th that are going to be drinking this year. You know what I mean?
For real. Yeah. To go back to the story is like, I had this coworker a couple years back, and she had quite the story. She was actually a runaway from her family, and they lived all the way out past like the Midwest. I'm in the East. I'm in Pennsylvania. She was in the Midwest, and she ended up coming to our local restaurant, she ended up going there at the age of like 15 or 16 in order to find work there. And this happened before I arrived at the restaurant. And a few years had passed, and then I got there and I got to know her, like, in her situation at that point. And eventually, like, very traumatized people, sometimes they can develop, you know, just the best sense of humor. It's I mean, it's sometimes when life gives you shit, you're forced to, like, you're just forced to make something out of it, and you at least have to approach it like with something. And it's it's sometimes it's miraculous, but you still have to do work on, like, you know, the tough shit. And my perspective was like definitely transformed from that experience, but I also had so many other experiences in terms of getting to know people and what they've been through. Um, to move along the story, she ended up stealing from that restaurant. She was on drugs for a while. I think she got hooked up on something while she was there, because she just had some days where she didn't act right, and eventually, they when someone's stealing, they catch on to it, and this person that works there from 15 to 19, they were like, yeah, we're gonna fire you. And like I didn't there was something about it, because like I feel like I have trauma in my life, and I feel like um I mean, trauma bonding is a word, but like there was kind of a protective instinct there, and like it wasn't really a romantic thing. It was just like, oh, like this
Empathy.
person's like legitimately like interesting as a person, and like I feel like those people, the people that have proven that they can survive to a certain degree, they need to be like, you need to try your best to protect them, not from a man or woman standpoint. It's just like from a person standpoint. Some people are very deserving of protection, and like I really tried to like talk to the owners and not say, hey, like this person obviously has a lot going on. Like she might need like a little bit of a support system. Like she doesn't need prison time. Like I think that's the opposite. Like I don't think a person probably isn't fully mature until they're 35, and I'm 31. That's kind of like where I'm at these days. So
Throwing young
and I
people in
think
jail is like throwing people in criminal school, basically. And anybody really, but
exactly. So the you could tell after that whole situation, she ended up getting a job at another restaurant. I don't know if my actions had an impact on the owners, but what I did notice is like I ended up like checking in on her a couple times, and that actually like really pissed her off. It pissed her off to the point where her boyfriend started like didn't like call me or address it to me as a person. He ended up calling my boss and like making threats to my boss, which is a really weird response. And it's probably an indicator that it probably isn't the healthiest relationship. But that's okay. Like I'm like shit happens. Like a lot of times if you have any sort of risk taking ability to try to do something that's morally correct, obviously there can be social consequences for that. Like that's an eternal trade-off. And I'm not saying I'm like a great person. I'm saying in that moment, I felt like I was doing something morally correct. So
but
fast forward,
no good
probably,
deed goes unpunished, right?
yeah, that's true. It can be very easy to think that all you did was just like piss someone off or make a situation worse. And a lot of times when you have time to really reflect on the situation, the reality of the situation ends up coming out much, much, much later. So fast forward a year later, and this isn't like a huge thing. What happened is like I was working at the restaurant and I was working at the counter. And what ended up, and I hardly ever work at the counter, it was kind of a rare thing. This person came in, even though she works at a competitor, she came in to order something. Okay, there's two pizza places, all right? There are two pizza places. She came into our business to order a singular dough ball while I was at the counter, which is already kind of like weird, like, why? You already work at this place. Why take their dough balls, So, but we got her dough ball, and then like she in that she lives with one person. After that, she decided that one dough ball wasn't good enough. She needed two more dough balls, so she put in two separate orders. And I was trying to like piece together why this person was like ordering dough balls, and like I can't say for sure what it is, but I legitimately think that like, and then I got super high and like blasted the next day. And I never would have thought about it if I wasn't like super high and blast the next day. But it literally, it helps me kind of like put the pieces together. Like, oh shit, I feel like people operate on a very subconscious level. on many different occasions. And like when I was able to like pick apart the subconscious processes that were going on in there, it almost seemed like a weird version of this person like saying thank you. You know what I mean? Like, and people that are heavily traumatized interpret things very differently. And so like I let that situation like just be what it is. I didn't let it ignite any other like
this is
anything
important.
else.
So many people will take like an apology and be like, that wasn't good enough. It wasn't said right or something like that. And, you know, I'm a big fan of saying, like, put yourself in somebody's shoes and try to see what they're going through. I feel like you just did that. You're like, yeah, they spent time and intent on this, you know, energy. You know, they spent time with me and they felt guilty and odd about it because, you know, they're not allowed to even come here to do this. So, I mean, the fact that they put all this effort into it, you know, acknowledge that.
Yeah. And that I think people, especially people that are traumatized, people develop different communication systems.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to always read that. And I think that is responsible for a large part of humanity's disconnect from one another.
Some people in the chat are so surprised that you would think that, or it's like a non. But I think you got to remember like how where the civilization has collapsed to the plateau of, and understand what we're doing now is we're in Babylon after the tower's fallen, and we're trying to understand each other.
Yeah. Now you have to like why. Like I'm just looking for answers as to why. Like literally. No, I felt like I presented this kind of weird. No, like why? So if you work at Walmart, like why the fuck would you go over to like if Costco's across the street? Why'd you go across the street to Costco to buy eggs? Like what is a legitimate reason for that?
Right.
Like I've tried to think about it, and like there are no consequences to whatever interpretation I make. Like. Because there's no like romantic involvement or even like romantic incentive there. It's like I'm good.
Unless that's what it is. Unless she was like just testing because she's curious about, you know, finding the strongest protector. And, you know, maybe you called and she's like, you threatened him. So maybe you're strong.
Yeah, I don't know. So sometimes you can be interpreted as being strong, and really the strength isn't really strength at all. It's just the fact that you've dealt with certain types of trauma, and you're like, oh, it's more of a preparedness, I guess. But like, no, I think if you read into certain situations, like people have a lot of fucking traumatic like relationships. Like, if do you think the Dane Cook situation is going to fucking last? You know. That's going to end in divorce. You just don't know how many years it's going to be until that's fucking divorce.
I think it's important for people not to, what do you call it? Place undue sympathy upon or innocence, to project innocence or purity or anything like that onto one of the two parties. Because I think this is a thing that happens. Like, oh, Dane Cook's the bad guy. This girl just doesn't know what she's doing. I think it's important to remember that humans are predators. You know, a lot of humans are predators. And that new movie, Prey, which is all about this, really, that femininity is the apex of predatorial behavior. Because, not necessarily, but the way the movie presents it is. You know, Prey is saying this female from the 1718 or whatever Native American tribe. I forget which tribe, if she's Lakota or if she's what she is, if she's Apache or something. I'm sorry. But she ends up killing the alien from the Predator movie. And they show how difficult it is for the men and how foolish men can be and everything like that, and how they're not as strong as other things in nature. But that's also what we know why men have invented weapons, right? Or why do we can't see as well as an eagle, so we invent a magnifying glass that can see the sky, right? Better than an eagle can. We don't have fur, so we invent or create jackets that are more impressive than anything any animal has, right? To an extent. So we try super hard to supersede our potential, right? And so femininity comes from this concept as well. It has to do with cleverness, being able to survive in a system filled with other characters that can be both very strong, perhaps stronger, and even are intentionally trying to control situations. There's a lot of this idea of alpha ideology is that you know, I want to start my own club because I wasn't part of your club, or you don't want me to be in your club because it's your club. And so the ideology of the alpha male is to create more and more fracture and more family nuclear. I mean, my family, my castle, right? And so femininity is a little bit the opposite. It's like, how do I coexist? How do I continue to make sure that the economy keeps running? I mean, and maybe that's, and I think that's funny because my definition of woman's even weirder than the left or the rights, you know, but
no, a woman is special. That's
damn straight.
And a man is special. Why not? I didn't define anything there. It's magic.
Well, Kurt, I mean, we're about 2 hours in. I think we should do this again soon, though. I think we should keep doing the APM thing. It's a lot of fun. I appreciate that you took the time to come through here.
No, like, fuck. No, this was good. I feel like we, like, in 2 hours, we really haven't lost steam on, like, anything. Like,
we didn't even have to touch news subjects. That's my favorite, when we can just go on what we've been thinking about now without news.
I mean, like, I mean, if you want to cap it now, that's your decision. But if you feel like we got a little more juice left, like, I got some ammo, man.
Dude, I gotta do the dinner thing that's coming up right now. That's what forgot today was Thursday. That's a friend's birthday. So let's do next Thursday, APM again. If you've got time, are you gonna be free on Thursday?
I should be. As of this point, I'm free on Thursday. I might be changing jobs, but I'll keep you updated if anything changes.
Legit. Let's try to do this again next week. I think that'd be cool. Hey, what do you want to pick? What would you want to pick up on next week? We have the audience; they can think about it right now.
Well, like I mean, I'm open to like topics, but like this was a lot of fun. And that's
Bernie says a woman who wants your dough balls is special. So that's not bad.
Yeah. I always thought talking about Jordan Peterson could be really actually productive. Like it's polarizing for a lot of people, but like I think there's a lot of good and bad that could be said. But we could save that as a topic. We talk about Trump being rated and what the wider meaning of that is. Those are just a couple ideas. Yeah, and well, like I think there's another like close to like 2008 situation coming up, and that's going to impact a lot of people. Especially like if you like evaluate like the CPI data, which was the only thing down on the CPI was oil. Everything else was up. Rent just keeps going up for everyone. So like it hasn't been a good measure of where overall health is. So yeah, I do believe I'm on Michael Burry's side. This, even though like he's been screaming recession for a while, but like yeah, I think there's too many indicators. Like it's just the sky's gonna fall and it's gonna be ugly.
Right.
That could be a great subject too.
I definitely want to contemplate more about the raid, because you know so many people are wondering what if he had evidence planted on him versus what if they took all the evidence he legally owned of corruption on the other side. It's going to be less and less though about him himself and more indicative of the system at large, what we're living in and what's going to happen to all people. Because if that can happen, kind of like the Magna Carta, like if that can happen to a sovereign, if that can happen to a president, it can easily happen to anybody below that level. So it could happen to anybody. And it's, you know, FBI should change the name to KGB, just get it over with. At least that. But
yeah, Attorney General, he did massive fucking lip service on TV today. Like, you could tell. I mean, how do you believe?
Go ahead. I didn't see this yet, so go ahead and explain that. What happened?
Oh, I just happened to catch it. Like I was watching live news, which I don't do anymore. It just happened to be on in a friend's house. So like I was watching that, and he said he couldn't essentially talk about the situation. He just said I approved of it. I sent it through, and I thought we had a legitimate means to believe that the raid was happening. It was anything you would expect an attorney general to say, you know?
Right.
Like, it really seemed like lip service, and like, but I think it's good general rule is like, why would anybody believe someone that's reading a teleprompter? Yeah, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying you can't take it at face value.
It's not his information. He's reading it for this group of people, so they've all got something to gain. And
well,
also,
what's he going to say? Is he going to say the FBI fucked up? He's like, sorry, it was our fault. We had a bad one. No, he's going to say, yeah, we're legit. This was good.
This to Veritas throughout the year. I mean, it's just they've been doing it to everybody. Finally, they did it to somebody big enough to hit the press because nobody cares about all the other people trying to stand up for things. And then there's the 90,000, the 87,000 IRS agents that are being asked. If you read the flyer, it's like, hey, would you like to work 50 hours a week, be on call, and carry a gun at all times? Join the IRS. I mean, that's almost verbatim, man. Doug, thank you for being here too, man. I appreciate that. He says, a great show. Yes. Also make a good t-shirt. Why would anyone believe anyone reading a teleprompter? That's a shirt. Let's get that worked on. That's a good idea.
Legit. Now I'll let you be with your special someone.
All right. I mean, you're my special someone, Kurt. I love you. But I'll talk to you soon. We're going to get the show going. Guys, thank you so much for being here. And you can find Kurt, by the way. He exists in our Advanced Philosophy Memes group. So if you go to Xirtus groups or you go to Andreas Philosophy Memes, which is for 28 days, I've decided to keep it safe that way. But you'll be able to join this interesting group where we talk about everything from minor attracted persons, sex therapists, marginalization, to Descartes, and even remnants of Nickelodeon shows. This is a pretty fun group, and I'm really proud of the nationalism or brand recognition that the people have here. I mean, they make memes about the fact that we're in APM. So you can find posts from Kurt right here. And Kurt, is there anything else you want me to link that they can find their way to your SoundCloud? I should put up for sure.
Oh, the Spotify page would be better.
Oh, yeah.
SoundCloud for friends.
Spotify.com. Let me get this.
American Time Machine.
Where do I search? Yeah, American Time Machine. He's got a lot of cool music. So check out American Time Machine.
A lot of it is troll music, but this album and the next upcoming album will be more experimental. It's supposed to be more psychedelic in nature, and it's supposed to be more geared towards artists like David Tipper. If anybody's into David Tipper, made it like really amazing album, but it's trying to go off into its own sphere. Nobody listens to it, but it's okay. You're supposed to listen to it in like stereo surround sound. So it's mixed in a very particular way. But there's
most of you people will love this. I think American Time Machine is exactly this crowd's music. So definitely get into American Time Machine.
Yes, the last couple albums. I mean, yeah, it's been just my giant shit post of what I've been doing over the past like 5 years. So
he makes music with guitar and with electronics and synthesizers, and it's like rock and acidy, and it's great.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. I mean, okay. Get into Advanced Philosophy Memes. Check out the music from American Time Machine, and be back here actually later tonight, because later tonight I have a special thing coming out. Jesus was born in Europe, or at least he was from there, and we're gonna show you how that happened with David Ewing Jr. That'll be up maybe in like what time is it now? Let's say like 4 hours, something like that. So yeah, everybody check that out, and see you guys in APM, and join the Tartar Discord. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Peace.
Advanced philosophy memes.